Hi, Izzy. Great to meet you.
Hi.
You meet you. It sounds like you have a really interesting story about how you got here. And I think I wanted to have a conversation with you just to find out a little bit more about how you got to the point where you were financially independent without following the traditional fire approach.
Yeah, sure.
So,
So I had a hip replacement back in 2016,
wow.
which resulted in me taking 6 months off work. I had early onset arthritis in my hip. I was 28 when I had my hip replaced.
Wow. Okay.
And when I was off work, I was talking to someone that was into network marketing, and he said, "Yeah, you know how it goes, right?" I ended up, I was scrolling through Facebook one day and I saw a 2 hour free session on property investment and how to reach buyer. And it was at that point because I'd had 6 months off work, although I was recovering from an operation,
Yeah.
I was like, I can do this. I quite like the freedom that allows me to not have to work because it's the first time really since that I'd ever had that because I went straight from school to university to a job. I'd never really had extended periods away.
What did you study?
Radiography.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, and the thing that comes with radiography as well is there's a lot of shift patterns, there's a lot of long days.
Yeah.
You don't really feel like you've got any spare time, especially there's like the hospital I was working at, there was 1 till 9 shifts, there was 4 till midnight shifts,
Oh,
and it sort of
wow.
takes up the entirety of your day, right?
Mm, mm.
So I texted my friend, my network marketing friend, and said, "Hey, do you want to go on a 2 hour free session with property investment?" I was completely new to this. I'd never even heard of Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Oh,
I
wow.
didn't even know
Okay.
what the difference between an asset and a liability was at this point because I remember James asking me and me being like, I have no idea.
How old were you for this?
I was 28, so it was
So you
while I
did
was,
this in that period.
yes, it was while I was off.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so I went along to this 2 hour free session, unsuspecting and unaware that there was going to be an upsell at the end of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was £1,000 to go on a 3 day course, but you get to take someone for free. So me and James split it £500 each, and
Mm.
we went on this 3 day course. Now there was about, I want to say about 6 months between the 2 hour free session and the 3 day course.
Okay.
And during that time, I saved like you wouldn't believe. Every penny was going into my bank account because I was like, the minute I've gone on this course, I can then spend all of this money that I've saved on a deposit for my first property and I can start my journey towards buyer.
Yeah.
Right. Went on this 3 day course. There was an upsell at the end
Of
of it, as
course.
there quite often is. But
What was
again,
the
I didn't.
upsell?
There's always an upsell. I didn't even know that. Like, I didn't even know about the
But
upsell at the time.
this is how they get you.
This is how I get you, yeah, absolutely. And then ended up spending all of my deposit money on more courses. It was about 8.5 grand, something
so
like that.
so the upsell was an additional course.
It was multiple courses. I got the
Multiple
basic
courses.
package. I got the
Okay.
basic package.
Yeah.
It was with Legacy, which is a property education. I think they've gone bust now. They've had so many different names over the. They were Tigrant at one point. There was something else before
Yeah.
that, and then as soon as they get bad reputation, they change their name.
Yeah.
But these courses went up to like 35 grand, right?
Wow. Okay.
And they were encouraging people to put it on their credit cards, all this sort of stuff. Yeah. But I didn't. Obviously, I had the money, and the 35 grand was with an extra person. So the bottom
Mm.
level of courses was 11,000, and they said 11,000 for the basic, but for the minimum courses required, but you get to take someone for free.
Yeah.
So I went up and I sat down and said, "Look, I'm not paying 11 grand because I'm on my own."
I was about to ask
I
if you'd negotiated that down.
Yeah. So I negotiated it down to 8.5 grand, but they wouldn't let me go any lower. They said we can't give you 50% of what it is. Lower it down. So that's what I did. And that came with 2 additional courses, a Facebook group, a variety of other networking things.
Yeah.
And that was
Yeah.
the thing for me. It was the networking more than anything.
So
Because
that
through
was
Legacy.
actually valuable to you?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's not something I'd recommend everybody doing
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
But And going back, would I probably do that? Probably not.
Having the knowledge now, it's easier to say no to things like that.
Sure. But absolutely, I can say if I'd have just gone on that 3-day course and not gone any further and not paid that $8,500, I probably wouldn't be where I am now.
Yeah, that's fair.
So through that, the next course I went on, I met what was to be my future joint venture partner on an HMO.
Mm-hmm.
I met a variety of other things. I met somebody, because I was then in a position, because they teach you about angel finance and how to raise money for deals. And there was one course that was purely, a 3-day course, purely on how to raise finance. I didn't go on it because I didn't pay ridiculous amounts of money for all the courses. But there was, where they teach you credit card techniques and how to approach angel investors and all this sort of stuff. And I was talking to someone, and he said, well, why don't, instead of spending ages raising money, like saving and stuff, how much equity have you got in your own residential property? Because residential property is about 1% on average cheaper than rental properties. So that's what I did. I remortgaged my residential.
Yeah.
I pulled, I think it was 47,000 out of the property.
And when was that? How long ago?
That was 2017. So I went on the 2-day basic. The 2-hour free basic. What was maybe sort of like the middle of 2016. Okay. And I went on my 3-day basic before the upsell, I think January 2017. And I completed on my first 2 rental properties October 2017. And that was basically back to back. I bought them at the same time and they completed within a week of each other. And that was from the money that I raised from remortgaging my own
property, yeah.
Yeah. And then my brother invested. He was the first person to invest with me. My dad said no outright. He's got money out with me now, but at the time it was a hard no. I don't think you know what you're doing. In fact, I got an email from my father when I told him I was going to be a property investor. I got an email from him, a bullet-pointed email listing all the reasons why he thought it was a terrible idea and all the things that could possibly go wrong.
Did he give a good side as well, or just the negatives?
It's just the negatives. In fact, I think I've still got that email somewhere. I'll have to show it to him at some point. Remember this? But yeah, so my brother invested 15 grand with me. That bought my next one, my third buy-to-let. I was doing the buy cheap, add value by doing the refurb and then remortgaging, pulling the money out, which I could then obviously give back to my brother.
Yeah.
And then the next one after that was a 6-bedroom HMO with my joint venture partner that I met through Legacy.
Just to go back on the properties that you're like renovating and doing up, what were you doing to those properties to add the value?
Things like new carpets.
Okay.
Bathrooms and kitchens are the 2 main things that get your remortgage. So, and they don't necessarily have to be non-existent. Because non-existent bathrooms and kitchens won't even really get you a mortgage to start with. So you're looking for bridging loans and stuff like that. So I got a mortgage and then did a further advance 6 months later.
The other one that I've heard was adding a garage. I guess it's a bigger piece of work, but I've heard that that's another way to add value. What are your thoughts on that? Yeah,
you can do. I've never done any of that, but it certainly adds value. Adding conservatories, things like that will add value for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so anything dated, basically.
Yeah.
So your pale pink, your green, sweet bathrooms that they used to have in the 70s.
Yeah.
And the floral faded wallpaper, stuff like that, will all add value. Anything with a bit of damp is great to get your hands on.
Wow. Okay.
So, because it's an easy fix, really.
Yeah.
Depending how long it's been sat there.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, anything with condensation is great because it does add value because again it's an easy fix. Add a couple of extra fans in, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Get rid of change the wallpaper. Make sure you dry the place out properly, obviously.
Okay.
But it's all about doing the maths beforehand, so you know what the property's going to be worth in the done-up condition
before you even buy it.
Before you buy it.
Yeah.
So I'm looking on a street where I know properties are worth, these are figures, £100,000, right?
Yeah.
And I know that if I do it, I mean, most areas have a ceiling price, unless you're talking about in the country homes in Cheshire where there is no ceiling price. Rich people, if they want the house, they'll spend whatever it takes to get the house.
Yeah, yeah.
But in most areas, it's a ceiling price where it doesn't matter how much money on top of that you spend on the property. You can spend, 100 quid on fancy taps. You can add another, whatever it is you add in, and the house value is never going to go above what it is in that area, because if people had the money to spend more, they'd be living somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
But yeah, so the trick was to know how much the property was worth before you buy it, work out what the refurb is going to cost you. So once the offer had been accepted, get the builder to go round. He can price it up accurately, and then knock it down to know exactly what you're purchasing it for. To withdraw, because rental properties are interest only, to withdraw exactly how much you needed to withdraw. So you had a maximum offer that you were willing to pay for that property.
Yeah, okay.
It's slightly more difficult to do in today's market, because a lot of these properties go over and people are leaving more and more money in these deals. But when I was doing it, and even when I was doing it in 2016, this whole concept of money in, money out, I don't know if you've heard that term.
No.
Okay, so there's something called money in, money out, where you buy a property at a certain value, do the refurb, and when you remortgage on a 75% loan to value, you're pulling all of the money out that you spent on the property.
Okay.
So say the property's worth £100,000 and the 75% loan to value, you're going to get 75 grand back from the bank.
Yeah, yeah.
The total you spent on that property, the purchase price, the refurb, the solicitor's fees, the stamp duty, is no more than 75,000. That's the idea.
Okay.
As you can imagine, once you include all those things, the actual offer you're offering is pretty damn low.
Yeah.
For a house that's going to be worth 100 grand. So it's virtually impossible to do in today's market.
Wow.
It was almost impossible when I was doing it. But 5 years before that, they were quite common.
Yeah. Okay.
So, so I did that. And then I did an HMO. That was my fourth property. And that was a property down in Burton-on-Trent that one of my friends that I met on one of the courses rang me and said, I've got this great deal. It's a 3-bedroom terrace that I think would make a fantastic 6-bedroom HMO because we've got the space.
Okay.
And it was near where she lived. So I was in charge of raising finance. She was in charge of doing all the work, being the project manager for the property. And I was dealing with all the solicitors and stuff like that. And yeah, I raised for that deal, I think, £70,000 in 3 months.
Oh, wow. How did you raise that?
It was a combination of all of the things.
Okay.
Angel finance.
Yeah.
I remortgaged one of my own residential properties.
Okay.
I did some sourcing for people living elsewhere, so finding good deal, because I live in St Helens, which at the time was kind of like a buzzword for investors all over the country, because there was loads of good deals going on in St Helens. So I would find the good deals, put the offers in, get them accepted, and then sell those deals all packaged up with the figures to southern investors that didn't have the time to spend ages coming up. And a buy-to-let is £3,000. So I was going out viewing properties on the Saturday, and a lot of people are not looking for money in, money out deals. So the offers weren't necessarily as low as they perhaps could have been.
Could have been, yeah.
And I was doing overtime. I was eating beans on toast.
Yeah.
So
they ran you right there.
Yeah. I'm just ringing people and saying, look, and I remember having Mel ring me on the Wednesday saying to me, can you put £5,000 into the account by Friday because I need to pay the electrician for this service? And me going, yeah, no problem. Putting the phone down and going, where am I going to find £5,000 from in 2 days? Like that was what we were doing. But I wouldn't recommend it, but I found all the money. Everybody got paid exactly when they needed to be paid.
Yeah.
And it just goes to show that if the pressure's on, you find a way.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, and that was a great little money earner, actually.
How did you build that relationship with somebody that you meet on a course and you trust them enough with all of these things?
Yeah, so Mel met somebody else off one of the courses, and he was living sort of similar to her, which is down in Burton-on-Trent. So he ended up moving into her spare room because he needed somewhere to live.
Mm.
And me and her, we built up a sort of. We were both smokers, right?
Mm.
So we met in the smoking area. And she said that she lived in this lovely little country house down in Burton-on-Trent. So I said, I'll have to come down and visit, because she had a goat in the field opposite and stuff like that. So I used to go down regularly to visit. She came up one weekend to visit me, and we would just talk about property.
Nice. Okay. So you just built that relationship over time, just talking.
Yeah, I met her on the first course after I'd paid that £8,500.
Okay.
Because that £8,500 bought me 2 courses.
Yeah.
And I met her on the first one. And then she came on to the second one. And a lot of these courses are at the NEC Arena in Birmingham, these 3-day courses.
I know it.
And she only lives in Burton. So it was better for me to go and stay with her than it was for me to bother looking for accommodation and stuff. Because it wasn't far away. It was only 20 minutes or something.
Yeah. Cool. That sounds really interesting. That sounds really good. Yeah.
And that property got us £500 each a month.
So how many tenants was in that one? You said
6.
6. So you broke it up into smaller, or because you said it was a 3 initially?
It was a 3-bed terrace, yes. So there was 3 upstairs rooms, 3 downstairs rooms. There was 3 reception rooms. Sorry, there was 2 reception rooms and a large kitchen.
Okay.
So we turned the 2 reception rooms. Sorry, there was 3 reception rooms downstairs. Yeah, 3 reception rooms, and we turned them all into bedrooms. Okay. We built en suites.
Okay.
Obviously the kitchen. We put a little dining table in the kitchen because the kitchen was quite large. Yeah, and there was a nice garden. It involved a lot of work. It was like virtually 70-odd grand.
Yeah, I can imagine it being a lot of work.
For the refurb, and then we had to buy it on a bridging loan because it wasn't mortgageable.
Wow.
We had to do the plumbing, we had to do the electricity. Like, it was the biggest project by far that we'd done.
And why wasn't it mortgageable? Was it any specific reason?
So, because of the state of the property, no kitchen, no bathroom. A lot of places, a lot of mortgage companies won't mortgage a property if they don't have a kitchen and bathroom.
Okay. Yeah.
And just the generic state of the property. There was a lot of damp issues. Half the rendering had fallen off outside, so we had to get the property re-rendered. Okay. All stuff like this. Yeah, and then because it was 5 bedrooms or more, the HMO needed to be licensed. So we then had to liaise with the council. One of the bedrooms actually was slightly smaller than the minimum room size, because each HMO has a minimum room size, depending on whether or not there's a communal reception area. If there's a communal reception area, the minimum room sizes are slightly smaller. But a kitchen doesn't count as a reception room. So even though the kitchen was massive and there was a table in there, it didn't count. But it's at the HMO officer's discretion. Every council has an HMO officer. And because we'd got in contact with them and said this is what we're planning on doing, and we'd liaised with the neighbours and all this sort of stuff, they allowed us basically to have one room that was slightly smaller, because that room as well was led on, because it was a reception room, led on to where the back door was. So this person also had their own entrance and exit.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
So yeah, we had some issues with the neighbour, because HMOs don't have the best reputation.
I was about to say probably a bad reputation.
Yeah, so the next door neighbour thought there was going to be all sorts of, parties and this, that and the other. There wasn't. They were all professionals. And Burton-on-Trent is a good area. There's a lot of jobs available for like unskilled labourers and stuff like that. So people travel, and HMOs are good for short term. Most people don't stay very long in HMOs because all the furniture's provided, all that kind of stuff. So we had to get in contact with a furniture rental company, which was tax free because of the way they'd set their business up.
Yeah.
So we basically rent, instead of having a massive outlay at the beginning of buying furniture for 6 bedrooms, and it's an HMO as well, because all the cutlery, the kettle, the washer, the dryer, the 6 beds, the 6 wardrobes, the 6 lamps, everything that goes in the house. Instead of having that overlay at the beginning, what we did was rent the furniture for a 3-year period, and then after the 3-year period, we'd stop paying, and we get to keep the furniture. And it added, I think, £215 on a month.
Wow. Okay.
Which is pretty decent considering.
What was the company that rents furniture to you?
I can't remember the name of it, but if you they're out, there's a few out there.
Okay.
And it's a really good model, actually. It's a really good way of. But I'll find out what it is and I'll let you know.
Yeah, I'll add it.
Quite a few years ago. But so there are loads of different ways of reducing your initial costs and your initial outgoings.
Yeah.
Especially with HMOs, because it is. And bear in mind, because it's there's a lot of legislation around HMOs, especially when they become licensed, which is 5 people or more in a property. And and bear in mind, it's people, not bedrooms. So if you've got a 4-bedroom HMO with 4 people in, and then somebody gets pregnant, babies are people. All of a sudden, you're not licensable, right?
Yeah.
So So and then there's things like you have to have so many meters of work surface per person in the property as well.
Oh wow! Okay.
So we had to make sure that we were letting. I think there was all of the bedrooms had to be single let. We couldn't have any couples because there wasn't a workspace for it. Because if you get it wrong, and the HMO officers come by and go, "You shouldn't have done that," it's a 20 grand fine for not getting it all right, and then fire doors and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely a big learning experience. It was definitely a big learning experience, and definitely
sure it was. Yeah.
Worth doing for sure. And then once we'd done it all, we remortgaged, came off the bridge, and just got a commercial
stock standard mortgage.
Mortgage, yeah.
And that earned each of you 500 per month, like clean profit off the top.
Clean profit off the top.
Well done. Okay.
Yeah. So a grand total if I'd have done that deal on my own. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that was 2018, 2019. And then in 2020 I bought another one, which was a combination of sort of like savings and a bit of angel investment. And that was in Lee, and I was planning on turning that into a 4-bedroom HMO, so unlicensable 4-bedroom HMOs. I went on the council's website and checked to make sure there were no Article 4 restrictions in the area. Article 4 basically means no HMOs. Council's decided no HMOs.
Wow.
And there's a lot of them around as well, so you've got to be very careful. And normally they're in a lot of city centre areas where HMOs, because it's all well and good. It's not necessarily due to the noise and stuff like that. If you've got one property and it's a 6-bedroom HMO, you've got 6 cars outside. That's not practical for anybody else.
Yeah.
Right. So there's loads of reasons why, and quite a lot because of the bad reputation. A lot of these areas will get together, the locals, they'll sign petitions. They'll send it to the council. They'll be like, no. We've heard that this person's planning on doing that, and a lot of things get stopped because the locals complain about it.
Yeah. And we wonder why it's so hard to get onto the property ladder, and here they are, making it harder.
Exactly. Yeah. So I checked. There was no Article 4 restrictions. So I went ahead, I bought the property. I started doing the refurb. I put a couple of en-suites in there. So there's 2 en-suites and then the main bathroom for the 4 bedrooms.
Yeah.
And then I was talking to someone in the pub and I was like, oh, I've got an HMO, I'm doing it in this area. And he went, I'm sure there's an Article 4 restriction in that area. And I'm like, nah, there's not, because I checked. And he was like, check again. So I checked again. And in the time between me checking, putting the offer in, and completing on the property, they put an Article 4 restriction in.
Wow.
Now, yeah. So basically, I think I completed on the property in the February, and the Article 4 restriction went in on the 31st of January. Now,
Wow.
if I'd completed that property 3 weeks earlier, I could have gone to the council and made the argument that, well, actually, the Article 4, although it's technically not an up and running HMO, I'd purchased the property before the restriction went in, and they would have allowed me to do that because that's how it works. But because I was like I'd completed a couple of weeks after the restriction went in, I didn't even bother approaching the council. I thought, what's the point? They're going to say no. So
I would have knocked on that door.
And I did the maths, and I thought with the furniture and everything else, because obviously a buy-to-let has no furniture, and it's a high-end buy-to-let because it's a buy-to-let. It's a 3-bedroom buy-to-let with 3 bathrooms in now because I've already put 2 en-suites in. So I rented it. The property does me very well. It's unfurnished. So I didn't end up turning it into an HMO, but I definitely learned a lesson with that one for sure. Especially because I didn't check until, because I spent the average en-suite to put in is only $2,500, something like that. Yeah. So I spent an extra $5,000 putting 2 en-suites in that I didn't need.
Yeah, but how would you, in terms of lessons learned, how would you make sure that doesn't happen again if the council puts it in on the fly?
So what I did was I checked whether there were any current Article 4 restrictions. There is somewhere where you can go to check to see if the council is planning on putting any restrictions coming up.
Okay, so that's the lesson.
That's
check
the
that
lesson
as well.
Check that. And before you start building anything, check again.
Yeah.
Because I only found out after I'd bought the property and after the 2 en-suites went in.
Yeah, okay.
So... yeah, so, and that's actually a great little money earner, because although it's a buy-to-let, I rented it originally. I mean, they don't live there anymore, but I rented it to 3 lads, three Romanian lads. 2 of them are brothers and 1 of them was a cousin, and they were lorry drivers. And they made, obviously, lorry driving.
They make a fair amount of money.
They make a fair amount of money, and because they knew each other, they're one family.
Yeah.
But they're also 3 men. So although it's a family, it's kind of not really a family. They want their own space. So they love the fact that there was 3 bathrooms in there.
3 bathrooms. Yeah, that's perfect.
So, yeah.
And so I guess to some extent, yeah, you got your value back in terms of adding the bathrooms because you're renting out to a group of people like that. Are you still renting to them or?
No, they moved out. I'm renting to another family. I'm going to be honest. I don't know who's in there now.
Okay.
Somebody. They only moved in October.
Okay.
But I put the rent up by £200.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So that was 2020, and then the other thing I did in 2020 was me and Mel sold the HMO. That might have been 2021 actually. It might have been 2021. Yeah, I think it was 2021. So she decided that she wanted the money for other things and sort of approached me and said, do you want to sell the property?
Yeah.
And I was like, sure. Sounds good.
Yeah.
So we sold that property, and in terms of profit, purely on the purchase, on what we bought it for, what the refurb cost, and what we sold it for, because we sold it to a landlord as a already functioning HMO. And we made £51,000 each.
Wow. Okay. After all costs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well done.
So that went to my next two purchases, my next two deposits on for my next two properties, and again, I bought them virtually back to back, and those were up in Cumbria, because that's where the market had shifted from being good in St Helens to the way the property market works in terms of good deals. Everything sort of, what's it called when you drop a ripple? I was going to say, what's it called when you drop a stone into a lake?
It's
The
like
ripple effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. So everything ripples out from London.
Yeah.
So London will be, in terms of return on investment, right? Not necessarily house prices, because obviously house prices are going to be always going to be more expensive in the south compared to in the north.
Yeah.
In terms of good deals, so they'll start in London and then it'll sort of ripple out, and then next thing you know, the best hotspot will be Luton, etc., and it goes up.
Mm.
And when I started investing, it was around sort of the Greater Manchester, St Helens area. And then in 2020, when I was thinking about buying some more properties, it was Cumbria. So I bought 3 properties, 2 of which I used for my income from the profit from the HMO.
Yeah.
And then now it's sort of like the northeast way, and then it's gonna, the markets will go down a bit, and then it'll start from London, and the whole thing will start again. That's normally the way that it works. So I bought 2 properties in Barrow, and then later with my savings because the snowball effect had started to kick in at this point. I was saving all my money from a property investment. I used my savings, and I was paying off some angels as well at this point to buy my 8th property, which is where I am now. And I bought that, I think, at the beginning of 2022, or maybe the end of 2021. It was pre-COVID. I'm getting confuddled with my dates in terms of when COVID happened.
I mean, COVID's a complete blur, so.
Yeah, exactly. No, yeah, it was pre-COVID. It was pre-COVID.
Okay.
Just as COVID was starting to happen. Yeah, and because I remember one of the properties was a pain trying to get building supplies because of COVID and stuff like that. I had one tenant that hadn't been paying.
Wow.
And we'd gone through the courts to get them kicked out, and we'd won the case, and we were just waiting for the bailiffs to go in, because that's how the procedure works. You've got to book an appointment with the bailiffs. They go round, and then when the bailiffs turn up, that's the date that officially you claim your property back.
Yeah.
And the bailiffs were booked in for a week after lockdown started.
Wow.
So lockdown happened, and that was it. We couldn't kick anybody out. Now, that actually worked to my favour, because I was rent insured.
Oh, wow.
So
good for you.
Yeah, so if I'd have kicked them out, I wouldn't have had anybody in that. I wouldn't have been able to rent that property out, because it was against the law for people to move house.
Yeah.
Right?
You wouldn't, there just wouldn't be anybody.
Saying that, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's
insane.
But because lockdown happened a week before they were due to be kicked out, they basically, the rent insurance company covered me because they were in the house and they weren't paying, because it covers you if you didn't pay.
Yeah.
I mean, rent insurance companies since lockdown are a lot more
updated their terms and conditions.
Yeah. So after lockdown, a lot of people couldn't even get rent insurance at all.
Wow. Yeah.
Because a lot of people a lot of renters knew that the landlords couldn't kick them out, so they just stopped paying. Even though there were stand-up tenants before that, they just knew what are they going to do? Kick me out? They can't do that. It's against the law, so they just stopped paying.
Wow, that's
they could get away
scary.
With it. Yeah. I mean, my tenants were okay. I had one tenant that asked if he could have the rent dropped by like £25 a month or something until he got back on his feet, because I think he was a chef or something. He'd lost his job. And we said, yeah, that was okay. And as soon as lockdown ended and he got another job, he then made up the difference.
Okay.
But this is the thing: as long as you're reasonable with them, they're going to be reasonable with you, and there's absolutely no reason why you can't do things like that. And a lot of landlords are too rigid and too no, they ain't, and turn the other person into a bad person without considering necessarily the circumstances.
Yeah. Wow.
And normally what happens with rent insurance as well is they pay once the tenant's been moved out. So they'll pay a massive lump sum to you once the tenant. Yeah, at the end. But because of the extenuating circumstances with COVID, they allowed us. They basically paid throughout, effectively.
Wow, that is really impressive. Who was the insurance company?
It was through my letting agent. So letting agents tend to get better rent insurance than landlords because they've got a lower claim rate.
Okay, I guess across a larger portfolio.
Yeah, and they've got a larger portfolio. So my letting agent gave. So it's the cat.
Yeah.
Being annoying. My letting agent, as part of the sort of package to join them, gave us 6 months free rent insurance.
Okay.
And after that, if you want to do it, you pay for it. But rent insurance isn't always necessarily cheap. And if you look at it in like the grand scheme of things, of how realistically, if you're doing your due diligence right when it comes to putting people in your property, etc., buying in the right area in itself is going to weed out a lot of bad tenants, things like that. There's certain things you can do. If you're doing things right, the likelihood of you needing rent insurance is teeny tiny. Like I was talking to someone that had like 50 odd properties. I mean, it might have only been 30 or something like that. And she never had rent insurance. She got a bad tenant, and it ended up costing her £21,000 because she didn't have rent insurance. And then she worked it out, and she said by her not getting rent insurance, she'd saved like £2,000 over the course of her property career. Wow. Because of how much the rent insurance would have been for all of her properties if you top it up.
Yeah. So
what I normally do is get rent insurance for the first 6 months and then drop it. Because if they're going to show their colours, they're going to do it in the first 6 months.
Okay, that's an interesting approach. What sort of due diligence do you do on your tenants?
So, I mean, this question is better suited for my letting agent. But it's you get a written what's it called? Reference from a reference from the previous landlord, a reference from their job, their employer. There's a calculation that they do, which basically it's called the affordability calculation. Don't ask me what the equation is, but it's just an equation.
Yeah.
Where they work out what they take the rental value, the monthly rent of the property, and how much they earn on a yearly basis. Put it into this equation, and I think if it's more than a certain percentage, it means they can afford it, and if it's less than a certain percentage, it means they can't afford it. So they've got to pass the affordability check, and then they've got a credit reference. They've got to make sure there's no CCJs against their name, stuff like that. But again, it's not as black and white as that. So my letting agent is absolutely fantastic, and this is the one thing people need to know. If the one thing to take away from this conversation, it's listen to your letting agent and get a good letting agent. It's absolutely crucial. So for example, I've had one tenant where the man failed the credit check because he had a CCJ against his name for a £50 TV 10 years ago.
Wow.
Right. But the letting agent rang me up and said, look, this is a situation, but I've met the couple, they're a really nice couple, they passed the affordability check, blah, blah, blah. I mean, are you bothered about a CCJ from, well, it's not 10 years because it was CCJ to only 7 years. But I think it was maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. He said, are you really bothered? I honestly don't think they're going to cause you any issues. It was 50 quid from a TV you got on finance.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, yeah, fine. Put them in, never had any problems with them. I had another tenant, and this is the woman that didn't pay. that I didn't get kicked out before lockdown. And she passed everything with gold stars and bells and whistles. And my letting agent said to me, look, she's passed everything, but I'm going to be honest with you, there's something there. I can just tell. They deal with people. They deal with tenants all day, every day. They know the good tenants. They know the bad tenants. They know when people... Because some people are just high maintenance, right? Even when it comes to things like signing documents and moving in and the questions they ask the letting agents and stuff, some people are just high maintenance. And this was obviously one of those people, like the hassle. I'm telling you, it's a bad idea. Don't do it. Me being me, and I didn't listen. And actually, my coach at the time told me, "I don't listen. Just get him in. Just get him in." Yeah. Got them in, and then they caused me problems.
Yeah.
So always listen to your letting agents, because they've got like a sixth sense about this type of thing.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, good advice.
So yeah, but for the most part, buying in the right area is another way to weed out bad tenants. It used to be that you could charge tenancy fees. The letting agents would charge tenancy fees, and that was another good way of weeding out bad tenants, because the people that were going to cause you problems were going to the letting agents who weren't charging tenancy fees. And it depends on how far you want to take it in terms of protecting yourself against certain things. Yeah. So I always allow pets in my property, because I mean there's legislation that's coming in very recently. I think maybe in the last couple of weeks I was reading an article about how landlords are no longer allowed to, or will no longer allowed to be discriminate against people with pets. But I always allowed pets in. First of all, because they tend to be quite, for the most part, tenants with pets tend to be quite responsible. Number one. Number two, they find it hard to rent places, so they're more likely to stay for longer.
And potentially even be willing to pay more.
And be willing to pay more, yeah. And there's things like, because I get a lot back in, like when I was renting out the 4-bedroom HMO that never was. I was getting like so many requests for people they wanted to rent that property out. People were sending me heartfelt letters about why they were the ones to move into this house, and I had to make the decision as to who to
ultimately
let in. But there's certain things like, if you're moving, if it's a young couple and they were renting beforehand, but they're moving in together for the first time. Although they're lovely, although they pass everything, because quite a lot of them, they'll come and view the house with their parents. And you're not going to have any problems with them. They're living together for the first time. 6 months' time, they're going to be split up.
Yeah.
You're going to be looking again in 6 months' time. So it's things like that. I mean, that normally doesn't bother me, but a lot of people are very funny about things like that.
Yeah. I mean,
so
the
average person wouldn't even have a clue about. So if you're a 25-year-old couple living together for the first time and you're getting rejected for all these properties, you've got no idea why. That could be a potential reason.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, my experience in the UK, we didn't have any credit history in the UK. We had nothing when we arrived. It was now 6.5 years ago. We struggled a bit to find a place. I didn't think that much. But what we also did, and I only found out later that it was potentially frowned upon by some landlords, was we paid 6 months rent up front. And we did that obviously just to demonstrate that we could afford it. But we didn't have other landlords that you could call or anything like that, because moving across from South Africa, and we didn't have the credit file. So that was a interesting experience. And then from then on, we just rented normally month to month. But I wonder if that would have got past your muster.
Yeah, well, I'm normally quite I normally like to give people a chance. I've got somebody in at the moment that paid 6 months in advance. And
Oh wow. The thing that I heard afterwards was that landlords sometimes like people growing weed in the property will pay 6 months in advance or pay up front. So some landlords are a little bit concerned about taking that kind of thing from a tenant, or when the tenant offers that, it makes them nervous.
Yeah. Some people can be funny with it, but people are going to do what they're going to do. And just because they're paying 6 months in advance, that doesn't mean they're not eligible for the quarterly checks, which they will be.
Yeah, fair.
So because the letting agents will go around every quarter to make sure the property's in working order, make sure they're not doing anything illegal in there. Because it does happen. It does happen.
Yeah, it does happen.
Or I've had people that have found out I'm a property investor approach me and ask me, I'll give you X amount of money if you allow me to grow weed in your property.
Oh wow.
Like actual drug dealers that I didn't know were drug dealers, that I was just chatting to in the pub or whatever it is.
Just upfront about it.
And be like, look. And I said, well, I need to put it through my letting. It was a whole thing. I was like, no. And I was giving him all these reasons why that wasn't going to happen. He was like, yeah, but you're fine. I'll just throw more money at you. That's happened to me a couple of times, actually.
Wow. Okay. That's hectic.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so that's where you are now.
Yeah, so I haven't actually bought anything since those 3 I bought up in Barrow. But I've got a refinance going on at the moment. That 4-bedroom HMO that never was, with the 3 en suites. I'm remortgaging that at the moment. This is the first time I've remortgaged it since I bought it, and I'm going to pull 37,000 out. I've got some angels to pay off, and I'm going to use it to buy property number 9. That's the plan.
Have you got an idea on which property you're buying, or haven't really?
Not yet. I'm going to use a sourcing agent.
Okay.
Anything for an easy life these days.
And you're going to do it on your own or with other investors?
On my own. Buy-to-let. Buy-to-let are looking forwards.
Buy-to-let, okay.
Yeah. Okay. HMOs are great, but they come with a lot of hassle. And if you're going for the fire model, if you're going for the money model, then sure, it's a greater investment, but you get a greater return on investment with HMOs. But it's not really fire as I see fire. It's not really financial independence because you still have to put in the work. You still have to deal with people. There's more work involved. So if you're going for something that involves very little, put it to one side and leave it, then buy-to-lets are definitely the better option.
So what got you interested in fire specifically? Because it sounds like you were just on a roll with your housing and your properties, and now you've maybe done a little bit of a turn to go into. It doesn't sound like that was your intention when you got started on the property ladder.
Well, I got started on the property ladder with the intention of being financially free and quitting my job.
Yeah.
That's why I went into rental income. And I looked at, I don't know a great deal about things like, commodities, paper assets, stuff like that. But I knew enough to know that in terms of leverage, property investment was the quickest way to get me there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
So that's why I went down the property route. But once you're down the property route and you're making money, obviously, from that, you then have to sit down and think about, okay, maybe now's the point I need to diversify. And that's what I'm thinking about.
No.
But it's a tricky one, actually, for me, because I feel like if I'm not putting money into this thing, I'm wasting my money over here. But if I'm not putting it over here, I'm wasting it over. Do you know what I mean? So it's just kind of
just the opportunity cost. What should I do with it? Yeah.
Exactly. I'm definitely going to buy property number 9 for sure, and then I'm going to set up a direct debit and do some index funding every month. Boom.
Yeah.
That's my plan. for like the slow build for the future.
Yeah, just plow into that. Do the traditional fire stuff a little bit.
Exactly. And I've got the income where I can do that.
What an interesting journey. An interesting path.
Yeah.
And the other question that I had was, what's the longest that you've had where, outside of the example with the person that didn't pay for years during COVID, I guess, what was the longest, or what is your approach to that risk of tenants not paying or anything like
that? The best thing you can do is plan in advance. So make sure that you're getting the best tenants in possible. Listen to your letting agents when they tell you it's a good idea or a bad idea. Buy in the right area, and that's not necessarily as important in the UK as it would be in other parts of the world. We're not in Australia or America where if the factory closes, everybody leaves and you end up with ghost towns. We don't have the land for that. If you buy in the wrong area in certain countries, your property will stay empty forever.
Yeah.
It's not like that in the UK. You will get the property rented out and it won't take you very long in the grand scheme of things, right? But no matter where you buy, really.
Yeah.
But you have the issue of the quality of tenants and stuff like that. So what you're looking for is the worst house on the best street, essentially.
Okay.
Get rent insurance for the first 6 months and then drop it if you're happy with the tenants. And make sure that you're doing everything you have to do legally, which is why the letting agent comes in handy, because if you don't do that, then the courts are going to side with the tenants. You need to give them the prescribed information, which is a document that you can find online that by law every tenant in the country needs to be supplied with. And it's one thing giving it to them, but it's another thing having proof that you've given it to them. Get them to sign something to say that they received it, because if they don't, there's nothing to stop them from lying about it in court. They're never going to give you that. Yeah, make sure that you're up to spec. Make sure you've got all the fire alarms, the carbon monoxide alarms. The little things like the banisters of the stairs, the vertical railings, up the stairs have to be a maximum distance away from each other, because if they're any bigger than that, kids can fall through and it becomes unsafe or whatever. So there's little things like that are the spec of the law, which your letting agent will know, and that's why the importance of getting a good letting agent, because they can save you from a lot of trouble. But also understanding that it's your letting agent's job to manage the tenants, but it's your job to manage your letting agent. And if anything goes wrong, it's still on your head. If you didn't do the gas safety certificate every year like you should do, even though you've asked your letting agent to do it, if they don't do it, you're still responsible. So that's the importance of getting a really good letting agent. So yeah, I mean, you can never reduce the risk to zero, but there's certainly a lot of things you can do to make that process easier. Lockdown aside, if you you hear stories. My best friend's neighbour's dog once letted a property out to such a body, and they didn't pay, and it took them years to get that person out. Shouldn't have done. You're doing it wrong. It's literally that simple. So a lot of these horror stories of people not knowing what they're doing.
I mean, I have horror stories from people I've spoken to in South Africa. There was a letting agent I knew back there that the law is a lot looser in South Africa. So in South Africa, it was almost impossible to get a tenant out legally. So what they would do is show up and remove all the doors, and they would be out the next day. They would just they would be gone, because you could show up and just take the doors off your own property. You're allowed to do that.
Wow.
Yeah. So it could get quite
You're not
bad.
allowed to do that in the UK.
I'm sure. I'm sure you're not. I'm sure you're not. Yeah. So I've
Yeah,
heard those kinds of stories.
I mean, don't let people put you off going into property investments because of horror stories for bad tenants.
Yeah. Yeah.
They do exist, and there are career bad tenants out there.
Yeah.
But if you do all your checks beforehand, if you make sure you're buying in a decent area, if you use your own common sense when you're talking to these people, if you set up your property portfolio correctly with all the prescribed information and everything, and to enable you to issue Section 8, Section 21s, etc.
Mm.
If you get a good letting agent, somebody stops paying for a couple of months, they'll be out a couple of months later.
Mm. Yeah.
So, and the other thing I would say is, if you build your portfolio quickly, because if you have one rental property and the tenant stops paying, you've lost 100% of your income, and you're paying for the gas, the electricity, the mortgage, etc. on top of that.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have 10 properties and one person moves out and stops paying, you've only lost 10% of
So you're reducing your risk by increasing the size of your. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
You have an emergency fund. You're building an emergency fund. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yes. So I was having a conversation with my coach because one of the ways that I was able to build my portfolio so quickly was by putting a lot of the refurbs and stuff on credit cards. And then the plan was put a lot of it, put my refurbs costs on credit cards. Things like materials, solicitors' fees can all go on credit cards. You can't put the deposit of the property on a credit card, but pretty much anything else you can put on a credit card. And then once I'd remortgage the property, pay the credit card off. But then once I remortgaged the property and that money sat there looking at me, I'm like, I got a little bit.
Off you go, another investment.
Exactly. So I ended up in a situation where I had like 40 grand on my credit cards. Now I'm quite good at playing the credit card game. My credit card limit's like 65,000.
Yeah.
So I wasn't, anywhere close to maxing it out, and I was 0% on all my cards.
Yeah.
And once you build up trust, they throw money at you like there's no tomorrow because they think they're gonna,
make more money,
make their money out of you. Yeah, for sure. So I had no problem getting finance. I had all these properties that looked fantastic on my credit score. Now I had a lot of credit checks on my credit score, which brings the number. When you look on your credit score and you've got that number.
Yeah.
And it's out of 999 or whatever it's out of, depending on which platform you're using, because they're different. Now, that number is only there for the average person to know whether their credit score is good or bad. When a credit check happens and your credit score goes off to the lender, they don't get that number. What they get is the information. So they'll be able to see how many credit checks they've had, anything, all that kind of stuff. So although the number might be low because I've had all these credit checks because I'm buying properties and stuff, that hasn't really hindered me from being able to get finance and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Especially they want to see, are you paying it back?
Yeah.
On time. And if you are, yeah, exactly. So, oh God, I've forgotten what it was. Oh yeah, so credit cards. So I was like, well, I'm gonna. Because I was financially free. I'd reached FIRE. I'd quit my job. I'd sort of spent 9 months, and my credit cards at 0%, paying off every month, was covered within, But then I thought about it, and I thought every 6 months or every year, depending on the credit card, I'm having to do money transfer, etc., etc. This money's never going to go down. I should probably get a job, pay my cards off. So that's what I did. I got another job and I started hammering my cards.
What was the job?
Radiographer. A locum radiographer.
So right back into the career. Yeah.
Right back in, yeah.
Okay.
And I got my cards down from like 40 grand down to 23 grand within the space of like 3 or 4 months. So I hammered it.
Yeah.
Beans on toast method, you know.
Yeah.
And then, and I was talking to my coach, and she said, "Look, how much have you got in savings?" And I was like, "Nothing."
Savings.
Because everything's still in. So it's all well and good me reaching fire, but there's a balancing act you've got to do with when you hit fire. It's fire, but it's made out of paper cards. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So she was like, you need to start saving. So I basically I left my credit cards, and I'm building up my 10 grand pot. So that's going to be in my bank account at all times, never to be touched. So if anything happens, I've got money there that can tide me over until I can replenish that. And once that's built up and my credit cards are gone, I'm then going to focus on flowering. But again, I've got this remortgage, and I'm going to get 37 grand out. So I'm like, I'm really so tempted just to buy another house with it.
Yeah.
Which I think I'm probably going to end up doing. Paying off some angels. And then that'll be pretty much done with in terms of my angels. Buy another house with it. And then once I've got that extra income, then it's only going to take me 6 months to pay my credit cards off, build my fund, and then I can focus on, I'll have 9 properties, 9 incomes, and I'll be in a better position then going forwards in terms of fire, and anything extra I can get then I can index, so I'm going to set up a direct debit and treat the index fund as just an extra bill that's going out every month.
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's the plan.
It's really cool. Definitely a unique story, I think. Quite an interesting approach. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sounds really
good. It works for me.
Yeah, it absolutely has, right? And I think you're very close. You've already fired for all intensive purposes. You've gone back to clear some debt, and then you're off to the races, I think.
Yeah, nearly there. The end is in. Well, I say the end. Obviously, there's never really an end when you're building. But in terms of my initial goal, which was to become financially independent and to quit my job and to have, and it's not even necessarily a case of quitting my job, although that would be great, and I 100% I'm going to be doing that. I can take 6 months off work if I want here and there. I'm not tied in because obviously with radiography it's NHS work. You're tied into the NHS because of your pensions. And if you take 6 months off here and 6 months, I mean, you're allowed, I think, like a 12-month career break or whatever it is. But if you're taking time off here, people quit like handing their notice when they're moving jobs and then use their annual leave at the end so that their end date is the Friday and then they start on the Monday. And I'm like, why don't you just take a couple of weeks off? And they're like, oh, because of my pension. They're very tied in.
Yeah.
So even if I don't end up quitting my job straight away, it allows me the freedom to not necessarily have to be so rigid and do things like that. And it's even like the knowledge. If I'm sure we've all had bosses that we don't like over the years, right? Having a conversation with your boss and then them saying something, and you'd be like, this person actually has no power over me. Because if I wanted to have my notice in tomorrow and walk out of here, I could actually do that with no skin off my nose. I'm not, a slave to the job. I mean, my income would cut in half for sure. It wouldn't vanish. Yeah. I wouldn't be saving a couple of grand a month like I am at the moment.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't. No skin off my nose. I can walk out tomorrow. You need me a lot more than I need you, mate. Yeah. And normally it's the other way around when it comes to employee relationships.
Have you? I mean, so you're it's just a weird tipping point. But I guess the question I had was, do you have any specific plans at the moment for once you fully can step away from work? What do you want to do with your time?
So I've got a podcast at the moment.
Okay.
It's a variety of different topics. It'll be on YouTube, Informally Informed. That's my plug.
Send me the link. I'll add it to the description.
Oh yeah, I will. That'd be fantastic. And I'm doing a lot of travel videos. So I'm sitting down, I'm editing a lot of different videos of all my GoPro journeys over the years. It just involves, and I don't have the time with work. Work is getting in the way of my life, to be honest with you. And once they're all edited, I'm gonna set them on YouTube to release, every 2 videos a week, and just set it up as a system like that. Leave that go, and then I want to do more traveling. I've got events that I like to go to. I'm learning Spanish and Russian at the moment, but again, I don't really feel like I've had much time to do that because I've been working all the time. But ever since I started this new job, like when I was off, I was going to in Manchester. The Spanish exchange is every Wednesday, and the all languages exchange every Thursday. But now I'm working 8 till 8 shifts in Liverpool.
Why did you pick those 2 languages?
Spanish is useful.
Yeah.
Actually, so the reason why I picked Spanish was because when I was off for my 9 months, I went to the US for 2 months, and I was going to be spending a lot of time in Miami because I went over for my friend's birthday and we were doing like a Caribbean cruise from Miami. And I've been to Miami before. And if you don't speak Spanish, you really do struggle to get by. So I went on this website called HelpX. It's like a workaway exchange. And I just put an ad up saying I'm looking for someone, because I didn't speak a word of Spanish. I knew C, and that was about it. Put up an advert. I'm looking for someone to come teach me Spanish. I've got a spare bedroom if anybody wants to come do that. And then this woman messaged me back like 2 hours later saying, yeah, I'm coming tomorrow. I was like, okay, cool. She moved in for 6 weeks. She spent in my house. She's from Chile. And at the end of the 6 weeks, I went to Miami, and I was having full-blown conversations with people in Spanish. And people were asking me, how long your Spanish is very good. How long have you been? And I'm like, 6 weeks. And they were like, what? But it just shows the power of having somebody in the house doing it. And she'd sit me down and go, right, Spanish, come on. And we'd go through like the grammar and stuff like that. I've lost a lot of it now, but I'm trying to, because the quicker you learn something, the quicker you forget it. But yeah, that's why I wanted to, and it is a useful language. Spanish is a very useful language. I think it's the second. I'm not talking about in terms of population, because obviously that's Mandarin, but there's English and Spanish are probably the 2 most. And then Russian again. Russian is useful in the sense that the Soviet bloc, there's a lot of countries that speak Russian.
Yeah,
and it's an interesting language. It's an interesting language.
It's a very difficult language to learn.
It's a very difficult language to learn because there's 6 cases in Russian. You've got all the conjugations, and you've got all they speak so completely differently in a lot of the things that they say, and there's no real word order, so you've got to change the word endings to reflect that. Like, you can't say, if somebody rang me up, or what are you doing? I'm eating breakfast. Well, in Russian, breakfast is a verb as well. So you'd be like, I'm breakfasting. Like, there's things like that you've got to remember, and get in the train but on the plane. They have things like that in Russian as well. So, but it's interesting, and I'm enjoying it. Yeah,
sounds absolutely fun.
But I can't. But see what I mean, though. There's so many things going on, and I want to do the traveling as well, and I still want to see my friends. And have a social life. Work interferes with my life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the main reasons, just that independence, that freedom to do what you want. I think that's one of the key parts of FIRE.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anything else you want to add that I've missed? Or you think I've missed?
I would say that, the earlier you start, the best time to invest in property, or to aim for FIRE at least, is today, and the second best time's tomorrow. The earlier you start, Because that time's going to pass whether you do something with it or not. So you might as well.
Absolutely. You can only be in a better position by investing in your own future.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much, Izzy. Really appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please support my channel by liking or subscribing. I really appreciate it. I absolutely believe everyone has an interesting story and journey to share. If you want to share yours, please email me at financialbasics@gmail.com. See you next time. Goodbye.